Hi, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live series on the release of the ISM report on business. My name is Dan Zeiger. I'm a senior writer and copy editor for Inside Supply Management. That's Institute for Supply Management's member publication. And we're excited that you're joining us on this very important day for our country and the world for a little breakdown of the Services PMI data in what might be the last significant economic data to drop before America learns who will be leading it in January 2025. The composite index in October elevated to 56%. That's the highest reading since July 2022. And there were a couple of other notable highs in the sub-index data that we'll discuss. And unlike what we saw in ISM's manufacturing data on Friday, the back-to-back hurricanes did have a little bit of an impact on supply chain performance in the services sector, and that's not much of a surprise with healthcare being such a big part of it. So there's a lot to talk about. Let's welcome Steve Miller. He's the chair of the ISM Services Business Survey Committee. I don't have a movie to talk about or reference like we did on Friday, a Groundhog Day reference. So let's just use the candidate or something. Robert Redford, if you haven't voted, please go out and do it. But yeah, Steve, in terms of the October data, just what stood out to you?
Yeah, make sure you vote after the call. First off, I apologize for the lack of light here. It's a lovely sunny day in northern Texas, and so the windows are playing some craziness on us. Yeah, good number. Good number at 56. You certainly see the impact of a higher employment ratings as well as a higher index on supplier deliveries. Why don't we get into the numbers?
Yeah, sure.
Some of the detail.
Yeah, I mean, we could discuss the hurricane. I mean, that was one of the things that was in the comments. Tim Fiore, our manufacturing counterpart, really, the supplier delivery index on the manufacturing side didn't move that much in October, but there were some impacts in the services sector, and there were some comments also to that effect. In fact, the supplier delivery index reading was 56.4%. That was a 4.3 percentage point gain and the highest reading since June 2022. So yeah, let's discuss that. I mean, and there were also a lot of comments about the IV solutions factory in North Carolina that was heavily impacted, and one in Florida as well. So just break that down.
Sure. Yeah, in our comments for slower deliveries, about a third of the comments were from healthcare. And of those, a majority cited the Baxter factory issue, which shouldn't be an issue for November numbers, given the latest news from Baxter on recovery of their major production lines. But certainly a serious issue in terms of availability. I think it also, Dan, impacted inventories for that sector because there were, for those that had the ability to get what they needed, they brought additional inventories in, at least based on the comments. The hurricane also, it seemed like, we've learned as a supply management profession on what to do when there's risk in the supply chain. Because several of the respondents also commented on their ability to avoid impact from the port strike because of them working with their suppliers to get inventory in place and be prepared. So given that was a smaller impact than expected, they didn't cite any issues in terms of supplier deliveries there.
Yeah, in regards to the healthcare element of it, if you want more information on that, I'll just say, our hospital PMI comes out on Thursday, and you can bet that the IV solutions plant disruptions in North Carolina and Florida, that'll be a significant part of that report on Thursday, you would expect. So you'll want to check that out at ISM's website. Also, another, I would say it was probably the number that caught most of the attention, especially with the gain and its impact on the composite index. And there were some thoughts that, that didn't really jive with the federal jobs report that we saw on Friday. And the caveat there was that, the Bureau of Labor Statistics did say that, the hurricanes and the port strikes played a factor there. But the employment index increased 4.9 percentage points to 53%, back into expansion territory. And that was also the highest read since August of 2023. So just break down what happened there.
Sure. As much as I can tell from the data, we've seen employment growth over the last 4 months. 3 of the last 4 months, we've seen it in expansion territory. Slight expansion for 2 months, and then a slight contraction for 1, and then the higher growth that we saw this last month. With the revision downward on some of the employment growth, I got a question a couple of months ago around, well, we're seeing this huge employment growth. How come the numbers aren't stronger? Mm-hmm. Now that the numbers have been revised lower, those kind of more moderate numbers look pretty respectable. Mm-hmm. I think with the having the nature of the index not being the speed of growth, but being the number of companies and industries that are in expansion mode, we saw a shift there from an employment standpoint. So I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, there were 9 in expansion mode versus 6 this month, and then almost an identical shift from 9 down to 5 in contraction mode for the employment index. So it may not be reflected in the total numbers, as that depends on how fast people are hiring. But in terms of the prevalence in industries on hiring, we're seeing positive territory there. And when you look at the business activity and new orders from a 2-month standpoint, average being higher than any other 2-month comparison for about the last year, I think that all kind of ties together for me.
Yeah. Any indication in the data or the comments? I mean, we're obviously heading into that most wonderful time of the year, as they like to say, the holiday peak season. Any indication that, companies were hiring to get ready for that?
Yeah, retail across the board popped. Mm-hmm. So every component of the composite index for the retail industry went up significantly month over month. So that's a very good sign from a consumer standpoint as well as from a retailer standpoint. It was good to see, because there were 5 months in contraction territory, and then this month expansion across the board. Yeah.
While we're on that topic, you noted in the report today all 4 sub-indexes that go into the composite PMI. And for those of you who don't know, those are business activity, new orders, employment, and supplier deliveries. You pointed out that their October readings exceeded the 2024 to-date average to this point. And you'd feel good about seeing that during the holiday peak season sometime, but we're going into the holiday peak season. I mean, based on that, should we be feeling pretty good about the state of the services sector right now?
So pending election outcome, definitely. Given that we've been in kind of slow growth mode, you look at our growth over the last 12 months compared to the prior 12 months, more moderate. Mm-hmm. I think the election outcome has a chance to have a much more significant, percentage impact. It doesn't take much to get us to contraction mode, and given the slow growth, if that can be accelerated, that certainly would be positive. Dan, the one thing that I'd kind of hold out as a 1, maybe to 2, between a 1 and 2 point impact in the composite index is what really happens with supplier deliveries. That spike, based on the commentary, certainly expect that a large chunk of that was due to hurricane and port strike contingencies and issues. And so, if that index, for example, drops from a 56 to a 54, that would have a negative 0.5 point impact. If 56 down to its average of around 51, 50, it could be a 1.5 point impact in the composite in and of itself.
Yeah. For a little tutorial, I mean, for those who don't know, the Supplier Deliveries Index, that's the only ISM report on business index that is inversed. So a reading above 50% means slower deliveries. And the reason they do that is because that's typical as the economy improves and demand increases. But, as we've all previously discussed, a lot of that was due to the hurricanes and some of those supply disruptions there. So that, as Steve mentioned, that is something that needs to be taken into account when you talk about how it feeds into the composite PMI. One index that does not, feed into the composite PMI directly anyway, but it is still very important, is inventories. And, we mentioned where we talked last month about how high that was. It was at 58.1 in September. This month, October, 57.2%. So still pretty high. Any sense there that companies are stocking up there for peak season? Or was that, maybe some healthcare hurricane safety stock? That's important to note because inventory sentiment actually went down 1 percentage point. Your respondents didn't feel like their inventory levels were abnormally high in comparison to the previous month. But yeah, just talk about that dynamic with inventories.
Sure, Dan. So having had this question in advance, I got to do a little bit of a data digging. Mm-hmm. If you look at the inventory level and where it was over the last couple of months, it's been a pretty significant impact. And looking over the last 10 years, the last 2 months have been at the 10th highest and the 6th highest level readings over the last 10 years. I believe what the numbers is. Mm-hmm. I'm doing this from memory a little bit from what I looked through. Yeah. And if you look at it in comparison to the same months in any of those 10 years, none of those prior higher numbers exceeded these last 2 months' numbers. So from my perspective, then my conclusion from that is it really was a hurricane and a port strike kind of impact to the inventory levels, especially when you look at inventory sentiment being down. So it's being up, but not up as much as it has been historically against very high inventory numbers. Right. So I think we should see, still have a risk of a port strike coming in January, and with with toilet paper in the retail outlets, we've all seen what happens when people are worried versus when actual things happen. I wouldn't be surprised to see that inventory number go up even more over the next 2 months in anticipation of, when there's a port strike, nobody gets fired for having too much inventory. And it's certainly a reasonable expectation that kind of the transportation and other logistical challenges by other people preparing ahead of time will get more and more crazy as we get closer to that date.
Yeah, I wanted to note a comment, one of the respondents' comments that was in the report. It was from someone in our agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting industry. And this person wrote, monitoring inventories much closer than in the past. We're refilling inventories for the fall and winter seasons at a lower level than normal. Those decisions are easy to understand. That kind of indicates that, they're not expecting demand, to be inordinate, this fall and winter. So, yeah. That kind of backs up a little bit that what we're seeing in some of the index readings is related to, hurricane and just creating safety stock there in case of disruptions.
Sure.
Prices index was another one that kind of caught my eye as well. A small movement downward. And the reason that I ask is that the reading, by the way, was 58.1% compared to 59.4% in September. So still a little bit, definitely not at the astronomical levels that we have seen in the last 4 years, but, still pretty elevated. And, I wanted to bring that up because Tim Fiore mentioned in the manufacturing report, in the discussion with that some of the respondents might have had some anxiety, about inflation returning, or conditions, especially in relation to what the next administration might implement in 2025, that causing the Fed to potentially pull back a little bit on any future interest rate cuts as we lead into a pretty significant meeting for the Federal Reserve on Thursday. But any sentiment that you can gauge in that regard, or any uncertainty or anxiety on that in the services sector?
So that's also something I took a look at, just because it's so topical, for this week. The index right now, so the last 12 months average is 58, and we're at 58.1. And prior 12 months, it was over 60. I believe it was 60.1 for the prior 12 months. This is very consistent with slow, moderate growth. Exactly the kind of soft landing that Chairman Powell is hoping to help engineer. So I don't see the same thing as Tim has in that risk of inflation creeping in. Now, if the election results in the same party being in Congress and in the presidency, with kind of the spending and tax reduction kind of proposals all across the map that have been suggested, if there's alignment there by party, I think we're at risk of not having future rate cuts with the anticipation of inflation. I mean, we're already over our GDP and national debt. I don't know how much further we can go before interest rates and the national debt payments become just kind of an untenable situation with the spending that's going on. So who knows? Maybe if with a split Congress and presidency, people will have to take a hard look at how we get more fiscally conservative. But at this point, I don't see anything in the PMI numbers that would say inflation is ready to kick its ugly head back up. It'll be more dependent, I think, on government action and spending and taxes. Yeah.
That will be one of the things to talk about. That's something that we traditionally talk about. Just to plug, the January-February issue of Inside Supply Management is when we publish our annual economic outlook and what it means for supply chains. And we always talk to our ROB chairs for that article. So I'll be looking forward to talking to Tim Fiore and Steve. We'll get some great insights on that. So look forward to that in January, February. Let's talk about the industries a little bit. One of the industries that you cited earlier in this call, and you talked about earlier in your interviews today, was retail trade. That being an expansion, that's what you would normally expect, I would think, at this time of the year. But it had the highest rate of growth among all the services industries in October, and it kind of reversed a rut a little bit. It was in contraction for 5 months. Just discuss that turnaround, and were there any other industry performance that stood out to you in October?
Yeah, that was such a surprise on how big that number was, that I dug into that as well. The September versus October numbers, across the board, all sub-indexes were up, some by 4 or 5 points, and one of them by 25 points on the business activity. So very positive, information coming out of retail. And for me, since that's such an indicator of consumer confidence, I think that's also a really good sign for services industry overall. Yeah, Dan, to go just a little bit further on on the overall across industries. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but we saw 14 industries in expansion territory versus 12 last month. I think we're continuing to see the economy get stronger, and business activity, even though the index is lower, looking at the overall PMIs across industries, going from 12 to 14 industries in expansion mode isn't insignificant. And then we also saw us go from 4 to 2 industries in contraction mode. So I think that really good sign for broad-based strength across the services industries.
Just to kind of I know it's a question that we kind of ask every month, looking forward a little bit. As sunny as a lot of these numbers were, we did note, and you did note last month, that the third quarter performance of the Services PMI, the average reading, was the worst since 2009. That's obviously Great Recession territory. So let's attach that caveat, and as the saying is often said, 1 month does not make a trend. We'll see what November brings, but you would think going into, as we mentioned earlier, going into peak season, that there's reason to be positive. What outlook would you attach to the sector as we go into the remainder of 2024?
So based on everything that I've looked at, Dan, the numbers indicate we're going to be positive through the end of the year.
Yeah.
So I think that's, I certainly feel excited by that. We've had enough bad news. It'll be nice to see, hopefully, some continued positive trends, especially in employment.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the one thing that, you said is always going to, that you pointed to today, that's going to be the X factor, and is the election. And, we've heard about election uncertainty for months. And, as an executive, I thought this would be a good question to pose to you. With resolution, hopefully, in the next couple of days here. Just in your experience as an executive, you've been through, election cycles before. Just what does it mean, when you get that resolution after election day, and you kind of have a good idea about, where the economic policy is going with the country? Just what does that mean? And what is resolution? I know I'm probably asking you to put on your election prognosticator hat or whatnot. I'm not necessarily asking you to pick a winner, but just what would resolution this year look like? What are executives looking for?
So to go about their business, develop business, grow business, employ people, stability. Lack of uncertainty. So having the election resolution behind us will be a really positive thing. So hopefully it's a tonight thing for the presidency, and it's not too many days before we know which way the House and the Senate go. Right. But traditionally, when you have the House, when you have the Congress on the opposite side from the president, there tends to be more compromise, and with compromise, there tends to be more stability and certainty. So that's what I would be hoping for as an executive. As spending over 10 years in the media and entertainment industry, watching $80 billion of ad spend go away is probably not a positive thing for the media and entertainment industry and social media and such. But I think, just people being able to focus on getting the job done is something you always look for. How do you remove dissatisfiers and things that are annoying people, and all of the ads and text messages and all that kind of thing? I think that'll be just a general kind of calmness improvement, and with that, people can get about their business and get things done. Right.
Well, how can the PMI data fit in? If I'm an executive and I'm looking across the landscape and I, look at some of these index readings, what takeaways should I have from the data, especially given the timing and the environment that we're in right now?
Yeah, the slow to moderate growth numbers, I was sounding like a broken record from the last couple of calls. We're not out of the woods. We can see through the woods, but we're not out of the woods. And small shifts can have a significant impact when you're in very slow growth mode, because it doesn't take much to get into negative growth. Going from where you are, it looks like from the comments we've had, people have been leaning out, they've been right-sizing organizations, that type of thing, over the last 6 months. And if we see significant growth, it's going to be, run as fast as you can to catch up, given limited staff and really limited investment over the last 12 to 24 months, given interest rates and their impact and investment levels. So to me, it's really focus. Make sure you've got the right inventory with the potential of a port strike coming up. If things change, make sure you've got an eye on your metrics and your dashboard so that you're early to the party if you see some type of significant shift.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Steve, those are all the questions that I had. I don't know about you. It just felt like a more weighty conversation that we had today, I guess, just because of what today is. But yeah, I'm looking at the data table here. I think the only indexes that we haven't talked about are new export orders and imports. Those were both an expansion. New export orders at 51.7%, imports at 50.2%. So, I mean, if there's anything there that you'd like to point out, or anything that I haven't asked or that we haven't discussed that you think might be relevant this month?
Yeah, so on the export orders, I'm very interested to see if that pops back up again next month.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be expecting it will. I think that also may have had an impact from people anticipating port strikes. And, it wasn't just your ability to get stuff in, the ability to get stuff out. And my personal bet, based on the strength of it before last month, before October, that we're going to see that clip back up again, based on all the strength that we're seeing across the services indexes. So certainly optimistic, optimistic that we're going to have resolution from the political situation, and calmer heads will prevail. And we'll all accept whatever candidates get elected in our local and federal level. And if you haven't voted, vote. The best thing that we can have is an informed electorate and people that understand business and understand the economy, going out and making their voice heard. So if you get a chance and you haven't been able to vote yet, please do.
Yeah. Definitely. That's one of ISM's 11 principles of sustainability and social responsibility, is global citizenship and being active and an active participant in your democracy. So I definitely echo Steve. If you have not done it yet, please go do it. And please join us next month when we'll discuss the November Services PMI. And thanks for joining us today. For more information, feel free to go to ismworld.org. Where in a little bit you can read our roundup article that details a lot of what Steve and I have discussed here, as well as how markets are responding to the data. If you would like to be a part of the ISM Manufacturing Services or Hospital Business Survey panels that compile data for the report on business, you can visit ismworld.org/join the panel for more information. And as I mentioned the other day when I was talking to Tim Fiore about the manufacturing data, mark your calendars for mid-December. ISM releases the semi-annual economic forecast for the manufacturing and services sectors. That's a valuable report. It really is. It'll detail recent performance of both sectors, and perhaps most important, what panelists' sentiments are for the year 2025 and what they expect. That report comes out on December 16th, and Tim Fiore and Steve will join me for a LinkedIn live broadcast to break it all down on December 18th. So we'll see you back here in a month's time, and we'll break down the November numbers. So for Steve Miller and some good folks who helped us behind the scenes, Christina Cahill and Jennifer Stevens, my name's Dan Zeiger. We'll see you next time. Go vote.